Long before the pandemic, this quarter acre provided food, water, and electricity for the people who live here. But this isn't some remote location.
How big's that?
The Oman Jones family lives in the suburbs of Australia's second largest city. Over the last few years, they've created a downsized vision of suburbia.
Yes.
One that replaces lawns with vegetable gardens, eliminates the family car, and strives to generate zero waste.
Going without is actually saying yes to other things, and we feel we live extremely richly.
Hello.
They're part of a global community of homeowners who believe that living in balance with nature doesn't have to be expensive. They say that people can confront the world's biggest problems, like pandemics and climate change, in their own backyards. And the tools to do that can be found in a book. For over 40 years, David Holmgren has inspired others with his low-impact but comfortable lifestyle.
Close.
His latest book is Retrosuburbia, the Downshifter's Guide to a Resilient Future.
Retrosuburbia is a manual to help householders adapt their homes, gardens, and their behaviour to current and emerging challenges.
With the book, Holmgren wants people to know that a sustainable homestead doesn't have to be off-grid or isolated.
Suburbia is this sweet point where there's enough space to provide a degree of self-reliance. Cooking a meal for 1 or 2 people is incredibly inefficient, but cooking a meal for 5 people really achieves amazing economies of scale.
It's a return to the way that people have lived for most of human history, and in many places still do. In small communities connected to their landscape. Patrick Jones built 3 tiny houses on his property for visitors who want to experience Retrosuburbia firsthand.
I think the responsibility people who have historical privilege have is to live better and pay respects to local Aboriginal culture and look after the world for the next generations.
Retrosuburbia's message of self-reliance caught on in 2020.
Yeah, so this is the COVID bed. We decided to build an extra veggie patch once we got into lockdown.
A lot of people said, oh, this book's written for the pandemic, even though it's published 2 years ago.
Sarah Fox, who lives in New Zealand, saw her event management business implode overnight.
I was employed one day and then within 24 hours I was unemployed. Like, I've never been in that situation my whole adult life.
New Zealand's government compensated non-essential workers like her during the lockdowns. But Sarah was determined to make the most of her time at home.
Yum.
That's when she picked up Holmgren's book.
Love that make do and mend philosophy. It was like putting on a different pair of glasses and looking at my property, realizing through the book I can make do with what I have. I don't need to have lots of acreage.
First, she started experimenting with food preservation and foraging. Then she expanded her vegetable patch. Cut logs in a shady spot are her first attempt to cultivate edible mushrooms.
Little bits of dough that are inoculated with the shiitake mushroom spawn.
In July, she put the finishing touches on a chicken coop.
She's trying
One of them figured it out. But you don't need to go out and spend lots of money to build a coop if you just get creative.
She and her neighbors take turns caring for the birds, and they share the fresh eggs.
Yeah, so this is the coffee grinds.
In another part of the world, Ali Tebandeke brought ideas from Retrosuburbia to community gardens outside Kampala, Uganda.
What was interesting for me was also another aspect of sharing with the people. And I do believe that people living in suburban areas, we really need to understand that we really need each other.
It's not just about you and your little house and what can you do for your family. And the resilience comes from being part of your community and being more connected to everyone on a deeper level and sharing the project.
Retrosuburbia helped people like Sarah and Ali get through a tough year. But Holmgren says that the coronavirus and the response to it could be a preview of harder times to come.
A lot of these ideas are informed by a bigger picture understanding of the limits to growth crisis, the peaking of global oil supply, and the climate crisis.
Both of which experts say Americans are not prepared for.
America used to have the best infrastructure in the world, but we don't anymore.
In March, the U.S. energy grid got a C- grade in a report from the American Society of Engineers. Power outages due to severe weather events are increasingly regular for communities in California, West Virginia, Mississippi, and more recently, Texas.
I'm melting buckets and buckets.
Texas is an example of what could happen if we don't get ahead of the ball.
So the suburbs, where over half of Americans already live, have a lot of room for improvement.
I think that is the bottom line, and we have the space to improve in.
June Williamson is an architect who has been documenting the changing suburbs for over a decade. In her latest research, she studied over 30 projects of successful suburban renewal.
Every kind of failed real estate venture can be reconstrued as an opportunity. When we think about retrofitting suburbia, it's about recycling areas that have already been built according to a certain set of assumptions.
And in many places, the built environment is shifting toward the future envisioned in Retrosuburbia. Fewer cars, and more green space that neighbors can share. But even if the United States never mobilizes to fix crumbling infrastructure, David Holmgren still believes that new habits can and should start at home.
We can't fast track the growing seasons. We can't easily transform buildings from what they already are, but we can change ourselves greatly. Whether what we do actually saves the world from harsh futures, we have no idea, but it's worth doing anyway.